the Palace of Westminster is a giant public school.
Is he hasn't got a great track record with his relationships with women, though he's a father again, and hopefully all the best with Carrie. But we've documented on Byline Times, haven't we? There's 56 investigations into sexual misconduct in Parliament itself. Do you think that personality he brought, I think Sonia Purnell, his biographer, said, he kind of gets away with it, he kind of drives around in a fast car, it pulls the birds, does, and we find it a bit repulsive, and sort of infantile. But some Tory MPs look up to that and want to be like that. Do you think that has influenced the culture and this sort of toxic masculinity? And it's not just men against women, men against other men, particularly with the Chris Pincher story. Do you think that has an effect, Boris Johnson?
Yeah, I think impunity is the biggest thing that sits at the centre of Boris Johnson, and where that meets a culture which is already in existence around the media, around politics, in environments like, journalism parties, dinner parties with politicians, and Westminster itself. There is that culture that predates Johnson, let's be clear. It's not something he brought uniquely with him. But the level of impunity that someone like him has enjoyed, I think really accelerates that culture, accelerates the level of cover-up and the level of abuse that can be perpetrated, because you've got someone who sits at the top of that system now, who's been elevated despite everyone around him knowing he shouldn't have been elevated, and a person who doesn't think rules should apply to him or people like him, and doesn't really want to hold himself to the standards expected of somebody in that position. So the fact that there has been, I think, an acceleration under Johnson. And I think it's part of the persona. When Donald Trump, we make these comparisons, even Andrew Neil made the comparison this week on Twitter. But, Donald Trump, there was all sorts of things coming out in his election campaign about grabbing women. And that seemed to, make him more popular in some people's eyes. I think both to some extent with the public and within media and political circles. The fact that Boris Johnson is, a bit of a ladies' man, he's a funny journalist, appears on TV, he's a politician, despite the fact he's apparently got a wife and a family in the background of all this, that just made him attractive. And I think too many people bought into that culture.
Can I just 2 points of information, because you've written and done a piece for Byline TV on Jennifer Arcuri. That scandal there was buried. A definitive scandal we've forgotten in our history of scandals of the last 2 years, Owen Paterson. This is a money back to crony contracts, a lobbying scandal. And there's kind of indicative dinner. You talk about this, he's in this group of people, where he's at the COP20 conference.
26.
26, sorry, COP26, in Glasgow. And he flies back to the Garrick Club to meet Telegraph journalists to discuss how they'll get Owen Paterson off this inquiry. It's found him guilty.
It wasn't for that purpose. It was like a dinner for the Telegraph journalists.
But that was discussed.
Charles Moore was there.
And he lobbied him, and he went him off. So that kind of confirms your thing. What do you think about the connection between these power nexuses and misogyny or kind of male intelligence? We often use the phrase Bullingdon Britain. Now, the Bullingdon Club had no female members. Maybe it does now. But
no, it doesn't have female members. So I can bring, once again, your favourite subject, I can bring my public school background to the fore.
Gosh, did you go to public school? I didn't know that.
So I'm a bit younger than Boris Johnson, not much. And I didn't go to Eton, but I went to a public school, which was all boys. And an all-boys boarding school has a lot of problems with it. One of them is that there are no women. In fact, the only women you ever meet it's changed a bit now, I'm told. But the only women or members of the opposite sex that you ever meet are people cleaning the floors, taking away the dishes, maybe the wife of a teacher. When I was at boarding school, late 80s, in the whole time I was there, I had one female teacher. She taught French. It was one. And the only other woman I ever met was the matron. So in the boarding houses, you had the matrons, who's a kind of nanny figure. a lot of people who come out of that education therefore deem women, as they deem ordinary people who do not go to private schools, as a sort of second tier. They're the people who patch up your knee when you fall over, or take away your plates, or do those things. It's an incredibly weird, curious, primitive society in which women do not feature, and as a result, a lot of public school boys of that ilk who came out of that era, and I'm saying things have changed massively now, were incredibly sexist and didn't understand women and saw women either as sexual objects or mother figures.
Wow.
Now, I'm not about to psychoanalyse our Prime Minister because I'm not a psychoanalyst.
And he's not on the couch with us.
And he's not on the couch, so it would be unprincipled. However, I knew a lot of people like Boris Johnson at school. I knew a lot of people like Jacob Rees-Mogg. And the attitudes to women back then and to girls generally, were incredibly sexist, even by the standard of the times, and the bar was low. So I think the fact that, as I've said to you before, essentially the Palace of Westminster is a giant public school. If you've been to a public school, and I spent a lot of time in the Palace of Westminster because, as you know, my mother used to work and I have friends who were there. So I've spent a lot of time in the Palace of Westminster. It is very reminiscent of a 1980s and previous public school. People are clearing the plates away still. It's a very, very, very male atmosphere. The people who run it, up until recently, Black Rod, all of those characters, all the clerks tended to be men. You're in this very, very male environment. And up until really only 20, 30 years ago, with very few women MPs, the only women present tended to be secretaries and people like that. And politicians would famously hire attractive secretaries and then very frequently have some kind of relationship with them.
Cecil Parkinson, famously.
Yeah, I mean, it was way beyond that. I mean, my mother, who worked in Parliament in the 60s, quite openly told me, my mother was a secretary in the 60s and 70s, she said everybody was having affairs and sexual harassment was rife.
Wow.
I mean, rife. And I think this administration, in fact, since the Cameron years, you have seen a turn back. Because remember, from Alec Douglas-Home onwards, there was only one privately educated Prime Minister of this country.
Yes.
Tony Blair.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So between Alec Douglas...
Margaret Thatcher's grammar school.
They all went to grammar school. Yeah. It was the Eden, Macmillan... and Alec Douglas-Home characters became dinosaurs. They were extinct dinosaurs, and it seemed like that era passed. Since the return of the Etonians, since the return of public schoolboys in office, and the Jacob Rees-Mogg thing, you have had almost a sort of throwback, just like he's the ersatz Churchill. You've had a throwback to that patrician, sort of Edwardian thing, and with it, you're going to have all of the incumbent sexism, I think.